Good afternoon. I'm Paul Gilje. Good afternoon, and this is the regular monthly session. And when we're learning about the immigrants to Rolette, North Dakota, and delighted to have the rest of you on here today. And our guest speaker today is Maria Griffith. Maria is the granddaughter of Lars Enochson Gilje, and Lars moved to the Rolette County in about 1888, 1889, and grew quite a family, and we're going to hear about the Lars Gilje family right now, and returning to Mia Griffith for that story. So go to it, Mia. Thank you.
You're welcome. We do want to say thank you, Paul, for spearheading this incredibly wonderful reunion that'll take place in 2026. It's important for you to know that we have all enjoyed this learning immensely. And we, as members of the Bertine Gilje Epping family, appreciate the opportunity today. Our research comes from our mother's autobiography, which I have a copy of the book, as do all my brothers and sisters. I don't think it'll show on the screen now, but we have taken everything as a primary source. And incidentally, it's important for you to know that my mother spoke and use that same type of language as her writer's voice. Now, we were given 3 objectives by Paul. The first one, we were supposed to find suitable photos of our relatives, Lars and Kristina, their children, their farm and surroundings. We were also asked to provide family history that would be pertinent. Why did they leave Norway? What was their reason for coming to the United States and establishing family relationships? Lastly, we were asked to provide stories and meaningful insights, such as family dynamics, that would help us to understand our pioneer ancestors. So let's go ahead and begin. Our research, as I stated, comes from my mother's book, and it was called The Life of Bertina Ottilia Gilje Epping, and the subtitle, In Her Own Words. These are my grandparents, our grandparents. This is Lars and this is Kristina. Please notice the difference in their ages and their time of birth. Father spent very successful years living on the prairie of Rolette County, North Dakota, acquiring and cultivating 160 acres of land. It was then, in 1907, at the age of 55, that he returned to his native Stavanger area in Norway. There he became reacquainted with Mother, who was 35 years old at the time. The two were married in Stavanger in a traditional wedding celebration that went on for 3 days. After marrying, the two sailed straight for America. This is our grandfather's story. Father was an unusual man. He was handsome, ambitious, and Norwegian. The lure of free land was overwhelming for him. He left his homeland in 1885 at the age of 33. Dirdal, Norway, had been the land of his forefathers since recorded history. But when the American government's posters went up in Europe informing the peasants that land could be had by foreigners for little or no money, Father packed his sturdy handcrafted trunk and bid farewell to his half-brothers, Mauritius and Thomas Andreas, and half-sister, Serena Gilje, and left for America. He had money for steerage, and his destination was Ellis Island, New York. The name Gilje has gone through many transitions. In Old Norse, it was Giljar, which meant a cleft in the mountains. The spelling of Gilje is more recent and used today. Interesting to note as well, his documentation is not in Ellis Island. Apparently, he arrived before efficient documentation was made on every person as they entered the United States. Our grandmother's story. In retrospect, Mother was a remarkable woman. She had Nordic genes. She was beautiful and small in stature. Her erect posture was evident in sitting, standing, and walking. Her abundance of auburn hair was piled high and held in the position with dappled tortoise hairpins. My mother was a pretty lady. She wore her hair in the style of the gay 90s. Mother was a descendant of royalty through Danish King Gorm the Old, who was born in the year 900 and died in 950. The first man of the family was Olav Andersen Harberg, born at Toten, Norway, around 1660. He came to Folksfjord in 1690. Home with a gentle Nordic lady was mine for almost 18 years. These are familiar places in Norway, and I'd like you to be aware that at the top right, this is a piece that was done by my father. He loved to paint as they went on trips, and in Norway, this is one of the many beautiful paintings that he made of the surrounding areas. You can see why the name cleft, cliff, and so forth might be related to the location. In North Dakota, as my mom speaks in her book, the land was free and abundant. When Lars first arrived, he built a sod house. The house was cool in the hot summer months. Father lived in it for a time until he could complete the farmhouse. This is the ancestral home in Rolette, North Dakota. On the right is the house that looks familiar in this era, and on the left is the house when it was first constructed. You'll notice the top roof line has changed over the years. I'd also like to point out the person on the far left is my grandfather. Although I never met him, he was there holding his oldest son, Clarence. Next to him is his wife, and her name is Kristina, and she is holding their second son, Ingvar. And her father came for a time to visit. I'm sure it was a joyful, happy time. My grandfather, Lars, donated the land for Westlands Church and Cemetery. It was used at the church from 1903 until the early to mid 1920s. The cornerstone was laid in 1903 by Enoch Gilje, and it sits on the left to the entrance to the cemetery. My mother and I and my brothers and sisters have all visited this cemetery with our mother. Lars and Kristina had 6 children: Clarence, Ingvald, Myrtle, Lawrence, Bertine, and Lars. You'll notice the children are all dressed in black, and Lars is dressed in white. This picture was taken after this young child, the father was dead, and this child was born. Our mother's growing up years with a single parent. My caring mother gathered her 6 children to her bedside and asked in Norwegian, "Heavenly Father, be a father to my fatherless children." Amen. Mother immediately realized her tragic loss. She spoke only Norwegian. English was, of course, the commercial language. My parents had been married for only 8 years. This was Mother's only farm experience. She spoke only Norwegian, and with Father gone, she saw herself as a foreigner in a foreign land. She considered returning to Norway, but that did not fit her budget.
What you wanted? Okay, I couldn't remember. I got
Fortunately, she lived on a farm surrounded by Norwegians. The Norwegian Lutheran Church bonded the community together socially, spiritually, and politically. I think you can feel from my mother's words the tremendous faith the mother must have had. Her oldest child at that time was 8 years old. Early life was without disappointment for Lars and me. It was a happy world without worry. There were no expectations for us. We were too young. As we grew older, the pattern changed, and the two of us joined forces to operate the farm with Mother in charge. Still, the burden, unfortunately, descended upon Mother, Clarence, Ingvald.
Listening to a Zoom session.
As I became older, there were occasions when I saw tears fall from my mother's eyes. She quickly wiped them away and continued working. By the adult stages of life, my mother had developed a number of strong Viking traits. From the pictures, you can tell she graduated from high school. She took out a small loan and she was able to get the state certification to teach. She did become a teacher and she taught in California for 30 years. Over that time period, she actually graduated from California State University at Fullerton. She was a very famous, loved second grade teacher. Another striking Viking trait, our mother was very brave and courageous. She enlisted in the U.S. Army. She interrupted her teaching career to serve in the Women's Army Corps in World War II. While in the U.S. Army, Reno and Bertine met at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. They were married after the war, and this is a picture of them with their young family of 4. I'd like to point out my oldest brother, Andrew, my sister, Kristina, with a Norwegian name, James, and then my brother, Lars. This is 4 of the 8 children. Half of us, approximately, have Dutch names because my father was Dutch, and my other half has Norwegian names because my mother was Norwegian. And then we have a brother who is named for Jeffrey in the show Lassie.
That's me.
Mm.
We took a memorable trip to North Dakota to learn about our Gilje roots. As children, we grew up in Southern California. However, our parents wanted us to savor our mother's heritage. So our large family of 10 traveled in a station wagon pulling a house trailer. We were on our way for the trip of a lifetime to Rolette, North Dakota. Please enjoy the thoughts that Tina shares below. As you can see, we were a tough family. We were rambunctious and we were even difficult to manage. There were 5 boys and 3 girls. We were all rumble-tumble. See what else Tina wrote to share with you.
Mia, what year was that trip?
What year was the trip? It was probably about 1960.
Thank you.
61. Now, this is the picture of our whole family. And this is about the stage of our family when we took the trip to North Dakota. The oldest being Andy in the center, and the youngest being held by my mother. Now, farther down the road, in 1976, Bertine made a cassette tape recording at the 1976 Gilje reunion. Please go ahead and read this, written by Paul Gilje. Thank you, Paul.
It was fascinating. Bert, we called her Bert, not Tina. And Bert walked all around the crowd with the microphone and interviewing all kinds of people. And then when the recording was completed, she dropped it into the time capsule, and it's sitting there in the cemetery waiting to be listened to in 2026.
It's going to be exciting. Now, as adults, many of us have taken trips to North Dakota to visit our relatives and discover our heritage. Would you enjoy reading these on your own? You'll see the various relatives that we knew quite well. Now at the bottom, I do need to point out, Dwight and Jeff went to Cuba together. Note the ride in the bright green convertible.
That's great.
Here they were very big.
Cuba's great. I highly recommend it to anybody.
What year was that, Jeff?
Oh gosh, that was just before the pandemic hit. It was in January of 2020.
Oh, you went to Cuba after the opening up. I'll be darned.
Yeah. It was it wasn't too hard to get in. You have to get a visa, but it wasn't too bad. It's an interesting place. Very interesting place.
Mia, while I'm talking to Jeff here, I'd like to give Jeff some other recognition, just so you can see what a great guy he is in terms of his dedication to the Rolette area. It was several years ago now, probably about 2018, 2019, when I learned that we were having some visitors from Norway, distant relatives, coming to Minneapolis. And I told Jeff about it, and Jeff took a flight from the East Coast, where he lives, to Minneapolis to visit with us. Came just deliberately for that session, came on a day, and then I think you stayed one night, didn't you, Jeff? And then you headed back to the plane.
That was fun. That was fun.
And then, and more significant than that is that a few years later, in the 75th anniversary of the death of Reuben Tosted in the war, in 2019, we had a commemorative service, and Jeff and his wife came out to Rolette, North Dakota, and met with us, and we had a delightful time. Even though, as you know, Jeff is a Gilje, and my uncle was a Tosted, but he came anyway, and they just had a great time.
That was a lot of fun.
My sister Martha Murphy provided an excerpt with text. As adults, many of us have taken trips to North Dakota. So I'd like to just point out a couple of things in the first and a little bit in the second paragraph. Yes, Inga is the oldest grandchild, my mother, who was the grandma, and my sister Martha, who is the youngest daughter. We took the coastal route to Seattle. After spending time, we were on the train for almost 4 days. I'm going to move quickly through. We stayed at the hotel in Rolette. We ate at the local restaurants. When we wanted to call home, we had to use the owner's phone at their house. They would come up to get us if we had a phone call. Inga and I walked out to Uncle Ingvald and Aunt Ruta's farm for exercise. We were a little curious about who we were. Then word got out that we were in town, so it was okay for us to walk and for exercise every day. Now, let's go to the end of the second paragraph. I'd like to point out, my mother was at home, and Martha points out, Mom loved every minute of being home. Our mother never, ever forgot her North Dakota roots and her Norwegian roots. She never forgot who she was. And as a result, if you look to the end of the story, you'll notice that Inga, Martha, and my mom have never forgotten this story as well.
Say hi, Inga.
This is, okay, this is our whole family, and it was taken at an earlier stage of life, and this is all 8 children with our mother and our father. Our family grew, and you'll notice generations are beginning to show large and small, young and old.
No, I wanted to snag a part. Yeah. And then I'll get all flour. It's like a paper bag.
Okay, this is my, these are my siblings, and there are 8 of us. And our brother on the far right, this is his son getting married. So you can see there are now 3 generations that would be here, my mother, us, and then of course these grown kids who are getting married. And this is our mother at the end of her life. On the right, this is my Jeff's son.
We're gonna get that in with A.
And her mother died, Jeff, correct me, she was about 94 at that time. Now, knowing that we live far, far from her ancestral home and from her heritage, we recognize as 8 siblings that our mother incorporated Viking traits in all phases of her life. She had learned these from her mother and father. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are the ones that probably stand out the most. And if I were to ask my 7 brothers and sisters, they could identify story after story to go with these various traits. It's a very inspiring woman. Most of all, she loved her Vikings.
Actually, was it not in that one?
I thought it was in that other plastic one.
Now we do know that Reno and Bertine Gilje Epping had 8 children.
That was for the...
There are now 65 descendants pictured here. I think our grandparents.
There's some interference here. If you're talking to somebody else, please mute yourself.
We are standing on the shoulders of our ancestors.
Like the only thing I know I've done is
now we have time if you have questions or comments that you'd like to make.
Did Bertina mention anything in her autobiography about the life during the Depression?
Anything or
Paul, she I remember her telling me a story during the Depression that they didn't get fruit much, but they got apples at Christmas, and she would eat it down to the core. And that stuck with me. She was always very very practical.
Do you remember anything different on that, Mia?
Yes, my mother remembers strongly about her path and how to be very thrifty, extremely thrifty individual. My mother would not let pants go to waste, shirts go to waste, food go to waste. She would save it and use it. I don't know if this will be a pleasant remark to make, but my mother would make cookies using bacon grease. And that's how she'd been taught. That's what we ate.
Do you remember her talking at all about how they all managed to farm after the death of your grandfather in 1917 when everybody was young? Who actually did the work of the tilling the soil and the harvesting? Do you know?
How did we work together? Is that what
Do the farming? I think the brothers definitely helped out. My mom does tell the story. I think it's in the autobiography where I guess she was probably 8 or 9, and she wanted to set up a swing on a tree, and she went into the barn and got a rope and tried to create a swing. And it was a rope to be used around the farm, not for a swing. And she got a talking to by her mom for that. So
Bertina taught in do you know what schools in North Dakota Bertina taught?
Yes. Okay. That was good. Okay. I do not know, but they were all prairie schools, and she worked with a certificate. The certificate was strong enough that in California at a parochial school, she was honored to be able to teach there. And she recognized that she should have more education. And as we grew up, she then obtained her degree in education. In fact,
did she say did she do any college training in North Dakota at all?
No, just that certificate.
Didn't.
I had originally planned to go there the whole time, but matters made it take the certificate and teach at prairie schools. But her love of education was strong enough. All 8 of us went to college because of the way she taught us.
Okay.
Paul, she did on the teaching in North Dakota. I know she boarded. It's I can't remember the name of the town, but it's southwest of Rolette, and she boarded with a family, and she wrote that she had to scrape ice off the inside of the windows. Apparently, she was put in a distant part of the house, but
that was in the 1930s.
Yes, that was in the 30s.
Yeah, so it probably was in a very poor time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, she never lost that thriftiness.
Yeah.
Ever.
Okay, thank you. Other people here got questions.
We are all thrifty.
Yeah. Wanda, do you have a question for Mia?
I wanted to make a comment. Mia, you had such a nice picture of Ingvild and Ruda. And every kid that grew up in Rolette knew your Aunt Ruda because she was the head cook at the school. And she just always had a smile on her face and was just a lovely person. She also made our wedding cake.
She was lovely. I remember visiting her often, and I remember that she knew all about cooking, and I enjoyed it immensely. We had meals at her house, and I remember distinctly her house.
I was on business. It took me through North Dakota in probably 2007. She died soon after, but I went and visited her, and she remembered everything. It was amazing. I was truly amazed by that. She was quite a person.
I also remember.
Frederica, you have a comment about Ruda? I think you knew.
Am I muted or not?
No, you're on.
Okay. No, I remember very well visiting her too at their home there north of Rolette, and just a wonderful, warm person who was so gracious as a host. I remember one of the Norwegian relatives, Katrina, coming, and I think Katrina was with us when we visited her in Ingvild. It's always a joy to be with them.
Good, thank you. Other questions or comments? Bernie, you have a question?
Mia,
Yes.
Okay.
this is Wanda.
Wanda, do you have a comment?
Well, I did have a question. So after the older Lars Gilje died, so shortly after establishing the farm, was it neighbors that actually helped do the farming, or I was just unclear about how the farm work actually happened until the children were old enough to do it?
Well, essentially, it was the mother with these children. And then in our mom's autobiography, men would come through and ask to labor. So she would have someone labor, but I don't think it was a permanent job or a job of full management skill. I believe that as they came through and could help, and she would be able to have them help, she did. But I don't think it was a routine measure for years and years.
It was interesting. Excuse me, go ahead.
Thanks. That's just really impressive.
Well, there's another dimension to this, Wanda, and that is that Kristina was widowed in 1917. Her sister-in-law, a half a mile west, Anne Gilje, was widowed in 1915. So both of them through the 20s and 30s were widows raising families side by side with a close relationship. And there had to have been some very real partnerships there. In fact, we know that Lars, when he first came to America or came to Rolette County, he and Enoch, Anne's future husband, built the first sod house and lived in it together while they were just getting established. So there was a close relationship there. But I've always been amazed at what that life must have been like on that little road just north of Rolette, with Kristina and Anne, both widowed, living only a half a mile apart and struggling to maintain that family, those families. Both of them had great big houses. They had identical houses, not identical, but close. Any further comments, questions?
Just a short thought here. My mother always felt bad that she saw her older siblings work. They were no longer in school. They just worked.
Oh.
She had the formal education that she felt such a privilege. And I believe that has part of her thinking as she planned for our futures and encouraged us to get education, because she realized that it was priceless and she wanted to have us do that. But I think it was watching and knowing that she had siblings that were never, ever going to be able to finish the 8th grade.
Okay, thank you. Anne Gilje, Anne Dahlstead, do you have any questions or comments, Anne? I guess not. Any comment from you, Mike Oyseth, about your knowledge of the homesteaders, and any question you might have?
Well, I remember one thing that was said previously was had to do with their arrival in the U.S. and some question about whether they were processed as immigrants coming into the country. And was the year 1885?
I don't have a great deal of knowledge about a genealogy. I went to my first conference in the last couple of months, and that's when I realized that all of us are expecting we have efficient records, but they were not kept on ships. They were not kept by villages. They were not kept by cities. They could be kept by churches, but if the handwriting was incorrect or not easy to read, you can see all the stumbling blocks that were around. Then I believe it's the United States that started saying, let's make this more efficient. We have people coming into our country. And so that's my only background knowledge. And if you go back to Norway, or in our case, we live in Norway and Holland, we see there are variations in how records were kept. But formally, around the world, they started keeping them around 1885. Now,
there's one record that indicates Lars came in 1885 and lived for 2 years with his brother in Iowa.
Yes.
I think that there might be some truth in that.
Ellis Island did not open until 1892, but in New York City, there were receiving stations. One was called, was it Castle Garden?
Yes, Castle Gardens, that's right.
And there were other, you know, maybe another primitive one even before that. So there were, and there are records from Castle Garden and some other ports of reception there. I just think possibly we might be able to find something more, you know, about their arrival actually.
Mm-hmm.
But by the way, Mike, while you're talking there, can you give us a little hint of what we can expect from you next month? Don't have to spend any time.
Oh boy,
Mike's going to be our speaker in April.
Well, I cast a pretty broad net. My attempt is to try to get an overview, understanding of the Norwegian immigration into Rolette County. And what I've done is I've looked at the 1885 territorial census, checked all the Norwegians that are listed there, and tried to trace them back, identify who they are, and then trace them back to Norway. And you might think that'd be a pretty impossible job, but in fact, there are so many researchers out there and family trees that can be found on the internet, places like Ancestry.com and Family Search and MyHeritage and so on. And if you look enough, you can sometimes find quite a number of these people. So I looked at the 1885 census, the 1900 census of Rolette, and then I decided I'd take a look at all those who received land patents for property in Rolette County from the beginning in the 1880s until 1901. So I just sort of bracketed out that period of time to try to look closely at and tried to learn everything I could about the people and where they came from in Norway and where they went if they left Rolette. And you can find a fair amount of that too. So
we'll have a
sort of
great time
interesting to see the flow into the county and then those and where they went.
Okay, thank you. We'll look forward to that next month, Mike. Thank you so much. Okay, further questions or comments from you? Mia, have you got some additional thoughts you'd like to bring up?
No, but thank you very much.
Okay, anybody else have anything? Some of you have been quiet. Inga, how about you? Inga, do you have any thoughts?
Inga's in the UCLA library and she can't unmute.
Oh, okay. Oh,
wave, Inga.
Oh, what library is she in? The UCLA library?
UCLA, yeah.
I'll be darned. Hey, I hope you've got a good file on Rolette County immigrants in the UCLA file. If you don't, we'll give you a bunch of stuff to put in there. Great.
Hey, Paul.
Okay, dear friends, thank you so very much for a wonderful afternoon.
You got Bernie raising his hand.
Hey, I don't know. I've had terrible connection problems, and then the battery.
Here's Bernie. Yeah, Bernie, go ahead.
Well, anyway, what is your name? You just show up as Griffith too. I don't think you go by that. So, who gave the presentation?
I think Griffith too is her husband.
Okay, what's her name? What's your name?
My sister Maria. Yeah.
Oh, that's why you both live. Now it makes sense. I knew Jeff. I've learned from this. Jeff passed through Eureka, California, where I live, and we had breakfast one time, and I learned that he had lived in La Habra, which really surprised me. And then when you said your mother graduated from Cal State Fullerton, I'm thinking that's a long ways from Rolette. And that's where I graduated. And I'm just curious, we probably lived a couple miles apart because I lived in La Habra during that time. I don't know what years you lived there, but I wish I'd have known.
59 till all of us left.
Oh, wow. Yeah. In 1960, we made a trip back to Minnesota.
Oh, my goodness.
Through part of North Dakota, but not Rolette. But I never thought I'd meet anybody in La Habra that had ever heard of Rolette. Because I knew that from my family background, but I just, missed opportunities. But anyway, I enjoyed your presentation. I'll have to catch it on YouTube since I missed so much of it because of connection problems.
By the way, Bernie's coming on reminded me of a dimension of a session we're holding in another 3 months. Next month, Mike Oisteth, as we heard today in April, is going to talk about the immigrants to Rolette County in general and in specific, but not family related necessarily. Then in May, the Beaver family will be featured, and that's a great Rolette County family that has connections to us. Then in June, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to honor a memory of a woman many of you don't know, but who is the mother of 3 of the major families we've been featuring. So she was the mother of the spouse in the T.K. Bakken family. She was the mother of the spouse in the Paul Tosted family, and she was the mother of the spouse in the Peter Gilje family. So she had connections in Tosted, Gilje, and Bakken. And Britta and her ancestry will be featured in May. So we'll have that featured before we talk specifically about the Bakkens or the Tosted or the Paul Tosted or the Peter Gilje. So just a hint about what's coming. Further comments, questions? Anything more? Are we ready to go back and watch basketball? Huh? All right. Thank you all very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mia.
Thanks, Mia.
Hey, Aaron, do you have any thoughts? Aaron, did you have a question?
You know what? I'm learning so much. I really didn't know. My grandfather was Norman Gilje, and I really didn't know him well. And I'm learning so much by listening to everybody else's stories. I'm putting pieces together in my head. My mother's family, my mother was his daughter, and there was a lot of drama in their family. So when my mom left home, she left home. Like, we didn't get a lot of stories about our ancestors. So I'm learning so much. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And by the way, Norman was the first cousin of Bertina. That was their connection. Okay. Thank you again. We'll see you there, Jeff. See you, Mia. Hey. Wonderful work, and the professionalism in that PowerPoint today will not be equaled, I don't think, by anybody. Boy, what a standard.
Impressive.
Yeah, very good.
We'll see you all. Goodbye.
See ya.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.